request all the participants to please mute their mic, and we would like to wait for 2-3 minutes more as we are waiting for other participants also to join in. So once again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I welcome all of you to our Design Dialogue Series 2022. I am Ishani from Bangalore School of Design and your moderator for today's webinar. In our endeavor to bring in the best design practice exposure to the students' community, BSD has started a design dialogue series, a platform to start conversations about different allied topics of design and an opportunity to dialogue with students, professionals, and those interested across the world. We are giving an opportunity to design aspirants across the world to connect and learn from practicing designers. Today, we have architect Shabarish from SDEG firm as our speaker. Hi Shabarish, good morning to you. Please note, question and answer sessions towards the end of this session. Request all the participants to use Q&A section or the chat box section to drop in your queries. I will take them up individually. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to quickly introduce Bangalore School of Design. Bangalore School of Design works with a mission to educate students to achieve excellence and create meaningful, responsible, and creative designs. Our focused curriculum enables us to deliver core professional knowledge by prioritizing studio learning, practical application-based learning, and more. All our undergraduate programs are affiliated with Bangalore North University. Our academic partnership with College de Paris, École Conte, supports our endeavor to bring in the world-class design education. Some of our academic courses that we offer across are interior design, architecture, graphic design, UI and UX, landscape, furniture, and structural design. Now, coming back to today's webinar, I would like to introduce our speaker, architect Shabarish. So, Shabarish is an architect based in Bangalore. After obtaining his bachelor's degree in architecture from MS Ramaiah Institute of Technology, he went to pursue his master's at Politecnico di Milano in Italy. Brushing shoulders with the top architects in the industry widened his knowledge and skill set and gave him the confidence to head back home and take up architectural work. He is now an associate at STEG firm, one of the leading architecture studios in Bangalore. So I would request Sabrish to address the audience we have today.
Thank you, Shani. Good morning to everybody. I'd like to quickly thank BSD here for setting up this webinar. I think it's a great opportunity for all young designers and aspirants to connect with practicing architects. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabrish. Hi, Sabrish. So I have a quick question for you before you start the presentation. How did you choose design as a career, and there was any inspiration for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say architecture or design was always my ambition. I actually wanted to be an archaeologist as a child, and I was always interested in old buildings and cities, and I would look up the monuments and cities that were developed by old civilizations. And I think this sort of became my basis for taking up architecture when it came to choosing a profession.
Okay. So it looks like, Sabrish, you have found your calling, and we wish you a great success ahead. So, guys, our topic for today is the art of choosing colors and transforming spaces with it. So now I'd like to hand it over to Sabrish. Sabrish, you can start with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start now. So good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to the world of colors today and, my perspective of how to use them in interior design. So let's quickly start with the short history of, color theory. So the year was 1666, and Sir Isaac Newton was trying to prove that, white light, as it was called then, was composed of 7 constituent colors. So what he did was he quickly sort of darkened his entire study room and created only a small slit in one of the windows, which allowed only a single ray of light to come in. And he had different sort of glass objects with him. One of them was, of course, the prism. And when he observed this white light passing through the prism, he saw on the wall at the far end of the room, a complete rainbow of colors, or what it was called then. So this sort of became the basis for establishing the color wheel, and Newton is credited with establishing the color wheel. And like we all know, color is categorized into primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And back then, red, blue, and yellow were considered to be primary colors. Today, of course, red, blue, and green are considered to be primary colors. Newton's theory was, and he of course proved it later, but he established red, blue, and yellow as primary colors, and that by mixing any two of them, you arrive at another set of colors called secondary colors. So for example, on the color wheel, if you mix a red and yellow color, you arrive at orange. Red and blue gives you violet, and yellow and blue gives you green. So similarly, he continued his experiments and proved that mixing one primary color and another secondary color gives you another range of colors, like all the tertiary colors on the color wheel. So as designers, it's important to understand how you can use color schemes in your design. And people talk about different color schemes, talk about monochromatic colors, complementary colors, and so what are they? So if you use one particular color in your design, in interior design, for example, sometimes you see a completely black space or a white space or a red space or a pink themed room. That becomes a monochromatic color scheme. So using one color on the color wheel creates a monochromatic color scheme. And using any of the adjacent colors next to one particular color, for example, 2 or 3 colors at the same time that are next to each other on the color wheel would be called an analogous color scheme. And at the same time, sometimes designers use complementary colors, which are colors that are on either end of the color wheel. And some variations of this could include split complementary or triadic and tetradic color schemes, where you use 2 or 3 colors and sometimes even 4 that are on different sides of the color wheel. And some other categorizations, like we talk about every day, is warm and cool colors. So everything that you see on the left of this black line would be colored as would be considered as warm colors. So these are colors that have yellow overtones and a higher percentage of yellow in them. And everything to the right are all called cool colors. These are colors that have blue overtones. And some other categorizations would include hue, tint, tones, and shades. So quickly, what these things are, hue are the base colors, as we call them, what you see on the color wheel,
There
all
is a
called hues. Sorry. Yeah. So hue, all the basic colors or pure colors are called hues, and mixing white with them gives you a tint. And further mixing a tint with a gray paint or a gray color would give you a tone. And the darkest of all these would called shades. So this would mean you would arrive at a shade by mixing a tint with black. Yeah. So that would be a sort of brief history of color, a brief introduction to color theory.
Okay. Thank you, Shabarish, for giving us such a wonderful insight about different colors combinations and everything. So we have, like, I would like to ask you one question, and curiosity struck me now. Like, is it true that colors affect space and volume? If yes, then how? Can you please show us a few examples for better understanding?
Yeah. That's a very important question for all designers to understand. First of all, how colors affect the space that they are designing, or how it affects the perception of a user's space, user's perception of that particular space. So how do colors affect the perception of a user in terms of volume and size? As designers, most of the time we don't get to pick and choose the spaces that we design, and most times we are we get to design very small spaces and compact spaces. And like we all know, white is the color that reflects light the most. So using a white space in compact spaces which are not very spacious and not doesn't have too much light in them allows for light to reflect the most, and in turn makes the space feel large and airy. At the same time, sometimes you want to make a space feel a little more compact. And when I say compact, it doesn't necessarily mean make it feel small. For example, if you look at this slide, you see a picture of a kitchen being used, and this kitchen has a sort of uniform monochromatic color theme that you see on all the walls and all the cabinetry and the furniture. What this does is sort of brings all the walls and spaces closer together. So for a user to be in a kitchen, it's a very personal space. You want to feel intimate with the space that you're using. Similarly, even in a study, you want to feel a little more cozy and intimate in the space. Even if it's a large space, you're not making it feel small, you're just making it feel a little more compact, and everything feels a little closer to you. This affects the functionality in a positive way, I would say. And sort of derivative of this would be to make the volume feel a little lower. For example, you can look at the space, you see the ceiling having a sort of wooden rafter, a continuous wooden rafter on the ceiling. What this does is makes the space have a low hung appearance. So for an entertainment room or a small living space, you would feel a little more intimate and cozy. And if you're spending time with your family members or near and dear ones, you would want to feel a little more cozy and comfortable with them. The exact opposite of this would be a smaller space where you would like to create the impression of it feeling a lot bigger than it already is. So for example, any foyer or entrance hall of any house, it's usually a very small sort of break space between the exterior and the main house. So how do you sort of create a good first impression? You always want it to feel much bigger than it already is. You see here all the adjacent walls, including the front wall and the two side walls, are having the same wooden texture, and this sort of elongates the entire space. And a guest coming into your house automatically feels like he's entering a much larger space, and in turn makes your house feel like it's a lot bigger than it is. And sometimes you never know what kind of a space you have to design, so you might end up with an oddly proportioned space. So if the space is much longer than it is in terms of width, you don't have a choice, but you'll have to come up with a scheme where users are always comfortable in it. So to make this odd proportion feel a little more balanced, what you can do is use the same color or texture on the ceiling and on the far wall. What this does is automatically makes the space feel a little more wider, and it balances the odd proportion of the space. And derivative of this again would be to make it feel a little shorter in case your space is a very long space and something is at the far end of the room. For example, in this is a sort of kitchen counter or pantry within a living room, but you want to feel like you're always connected to that space. So by painting the far wall in a particular color, you always draw your focus towards it, and it makes it feel a little more closer to you, and you're always connected to that particular space. And I would say the exact opposite of this would be to make it feel a little narrow and long. And you would probably see these being used in commercial establishments and showrooms where you want to put a particular product on display. So like in this picture that you see, the opposite walls have a black sort of glossy theme, and it's making the space feel a lot longer than it already is. So what this does is it tricks the customer into thinking that there are a lot more products on display, and he in turn feels like he's in a bigger shop or a bigger store. And this is a neat little trick that all shopkeepers use to enhance the ambience of the space quickly. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that was really nice. I never thought it was so much impactful actually. So,
Right.
the question is like in our day to day life, we see usage of different colors in our interiors, and different colors have different impacts on our mind and mood. So, I think you
Yeah.
are the right person to give us an insight on this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question again. So, how do colors affect the psychology of the people who are using the space? As designers, it's important to always positively influence the user, and not sort of have any negative impact on his mood or his behavior. And so, how do colors affect the mood of people? So, this is a very simple graphic, showing the effect of different colors and what it brings out in people. So, for example, red is a very bright color. It's always associated with passion and energy and excitement. At the same time, white is associated with purity and cleanliness, and blue, for example, is associated with being calm and a very soothing color. Let's see some more examples of this. So these are two examples. One is probably a restaurant, and the other one is a showroom for furniture or something of that sort. So if you as a buyer or a user are walking across the street, you always are drawn towards a bright color. So most of these fast food restaurants or commercial establishments always make use of bright colors to attract customers to their store or to their shop or to their restaurant. And looking at a red color immediately draws focus towards that particular space, and you want to go in and either look at the product or go in and have a quick bite, as opposed to having a plain color that you might that might get lost in the complete surroundings around you, and if you're walking down the street you might not notice it. And red is always also sort of associated with being a warning color because it's quick to alert people to its presence. So you always see them being used in emergency signals and around warning signs, for example. And another very nice color I would say is yellow, which is a very and warm color. It has a very nurturing effect on people, and it's also associated with youthfulness to a certain extent. So you would probably find yellow being used in youth hostels or young offices, startups. And at the same time, it's also used in sort of a traditional setup where you, for example, in this picture that you see, it's a very eclectic sort of setup with modern and sort of traditional pieces coming together very well in this particular space. And the yellow sort of provides that warmth as a backdrop to all these furniture pieces here. Blue is another primary color, like we discussed, and it's used widely by designers all across the world. And people associate blue with the sky or with the ocean or the sea or water, and it immediately has a very calming and soothing effect on them. So you would probably use blue in your office spaces or commercial spaces where you want people to have a calm and cool, collected mind always. Um, and I think another designer favorite would be black. Scientifically, black is, of course, the absence of colors, and people say, or without any color, that this darkness is what black is. But I think most designers try to bring in an element of black in their design, and it's also one of my favorite colors, of course. And like you see here, it's a very powerful color, just like red. It signifies power and sophistication. And this particular example, you can see, black being contrasted by a gold accent, automatically creates a very sophisticated ambience to the space. Yeah, so these were a very few examples of colors being used as themes in spaces, and let's see a few more examples of how they're being used all around us in everyday life. To quickly categorize color usage, I would say it's associated a design associated usage and a functional usage. So when I say design associated, it could be completely aesthetic, aesthetic in terms of using a color only to improve the appearance of a particular space, and it could be used as a theme. So, for example, a particular person likes only a particular color, and his bedroom can be a particular theme. So, a red somebody who likes red can have a red themed room, and it can also be used as an accent color. So accent is when you try to make a particular element that you're trying to highlight stand out more or pop out in a particular space. When it comes to functional usages, you find colors being used in a functional manner in public spaces, I would say. So in metro terminals you find them to demarcate different metro routes, and in multi-story buildings it sort of creates a differentiator between different floors. And let's see a few more examples of these. And I'd like you guys to notice the effect of colors in these particular spaces. So this is an example of blue being used as a theme in a house, in a living room in a house. And like we discussed before, blue is a very calm and soothing color. And here it's being contrasted well by a gold accent. And it automatically creates a very nice, calm, and soothing atmosphere for people to relax in. And this is another example of an office space where yellow is being used as a theme. So here you can notice that the office has a sort of neutral theme in the background with white, gray, and black being used as the main theme, and a yellow being used as a highlighter or a break. So immediately it feels a little more youthful, a little more warm and inviting for people to come in and work. And this is another space in the same office. I think it's a conference room with a forest green theme, and it looks like a quite a large conference room. And you would always associate a conference room to be with a lot of hot heads, people always fighting with each other and arguing over important matters. And in this particular sort of atmosphere, you would want calmer heads to prevail. You don't want people getting worked up unnecessarily. So using a calm color like the blue or a forest green, like in this image, would always keep people calm and not on their toes, and maybe influence them positively in making the right decisions. And the other space that you can see here is a hospital where you can see a white and blue theme being used. White, of course, like we discussed before, signifies purity and cleanliness. So everybody visiting the hospital would, immediately be reassured that the space that they are in is a very clean and hygienic atmosphere. And the blue, for example, here is being used as a backdrop near the reception and the waiting area. So you'd associate a lot of emergency cases and people being very emotional in these kind of places. And the blue color would sort of keep them calm and not get them all worked up. Ishani, I think there's some echo, and can you mute everybody?
Yeah.
Can you mute the audio, please? Yeah. This is another example of a color being used as an accent. So I think this is the same office space, and now you look at it from a different perspective, where it becomes an accent or a differentiator within the same office atmosphere. Like we discussed, it's the same gray and beige sort of base as a theme. And this particular yellow space is probably a break room or a relaxation room or even a pantry. And by using a bright color, people who are working in the space always find this to be in their peripheral vision, and they're always aware of the space being there. So it also becomes a sort of reassurance or a reminder for them to take a break when they need to. And it maybe even highlights the design of the space. It's a very nice roundly shaped object in the middle of a large empty space. And this is a more functional use of colors. So, for example, people working in multi-story buildings where offices sprawl across 4 5 floors. A lift might be carrying 20 people at the same time. You might not know which floor you are on. So, the lobby being painted in a particular color with the floor being displayed bright and big. You can quickly associate yourself or orient yourself on the right floor, and you know that you're on the right floor. For example, here showing the orange theme is signifying a library. So you can quickly, not get lost in the building, and you can quickly walk out of the lift and enter the space that you want to. And in public spaces, of course, like we discussed before, metro lines always are associated with particular colors. And maybe during rush hours in the morning or in the evening when people are getting back or from work, they don't want to spend too much time figuring out their routes, and they know which color or line they're going to take. So they know that they're going to take a red line or a purple line or a green line. So for example, in Bangalore, purple line is associated with a particular route and a green line is associated with another particular route. And you know where people are going to go. When you say I'm taking the purple line, you know which direction they are heading in. And here you can see color being used on the floor. So when I say being used as a theme, it doesn't necessarily mean it's always on the walls, for example. It can also be on the floor. And it helps people finding their way in large public spaces where it's easy to get lost. And you can see here that it's probably a symbol for a handicapped person to move in this particular direction or take a detour here to access facilities that is being provided. And this is another example of color being used as an aesthetic element, and it in turn becomes a functional use of color. So I think this is a neighborhood in France where Nike, along with a particular designer, I'm not sure of his name, completely transformed this public space in the middle of two buildings into a basketball court. So even though people were aware of this space that it could be used for leisure or some sort of sport, nobody was making real use of it. And by immediately painting these colors in this particular space, they always are aware of this color. And kids walking down the street are quickly attracted to the space, and they want to go in there and play, and it really transforms the space and makes it more functional, I would say. So yeah, now I would like to sort of show my usage of colors in projects that I have worked on, and I'd like this session to be a little more interactive. So you guys could, respond to questions that I'm asking with, answers in the chat box, and let's see how it goes. So this was a meat store I recently completed, and like we all know, meat stores always are associated with the red color. I guess for the blood that's that comes out of meat industry. I wanted to question this idea a little bit. So I sort of worked on the entire spectrum of red colors, ranging from salmon pink and to a dark shade of maroon. We wanted to understand what is the right color to use in a meat store. Like we discussed before, again, it could these two ends of the spectrum can have different influences on the mood of the person being in that particular space. So a pink, of course, can have a very calming influence, and a red, could get people worked up, and it could signal some sort of emergency, for example. So the idea in this space was to use or upcycle old egg trays. That was the theme for this particular store, and we painted all the trays up to one particular color, which I'm not going to reveal yet. This is a desaturated image, of course, and we presented this to the client, and we gave him two options. So, like we discussed, there was one with a bright red theme with yellow accents, and there was another option with a salmon pink color with gold accents. So, could you guys identify which color was actually used in this store? You could leave your answers in the chat box. So these were the two options. I'm also trying to look at this. One second. I think most of them are going with red, and some people are saying pink. Okay. So yeah, the final sort of theme that we went in was the actual image. So this was a pink and gold accented store. So the idea was, so you can't see in this image, but the entire storefront was glass. So people walking across the street are immediately sort of drawn towards this installation. And by using a calm color, the interiors feel a lot more calmer instead of using a red color. And I think the clients also loved it, and the store has turned out pretty well. And another example I'd like to show you guys today was a recently completed project. This is a living space inside that house, and I have sort of altered the colors here, and I would like you guys to guess which color was finally used. So this is one of the options. This is an option where I've made the sofas red. This is of course with green, and there's a black option as well. So these are the three options, and could you guys identify which color was actually used in this particular space? I think a lot of people are going with black. Okay. So it was in fact blue color, which I didn't show you as an option, of course, but I wanted you guys to recall what we just spoke about. So there was no problem in using any other color, of course, but as in terms of the impact it has on the space, it's important to use complementary colors together. So this, of course, is a very neutral themed house where it's all beige and white, but there are overtones of wood everywhere, and wood is, of course, a very warm color. And by using red or green, for example, that's another warm color. So we wanted to complement it with a cooler color and went with a blue color, in fact. So the final sofa was selected was supposed to be a blue one. image of it. And this is another picture of the same house, a small study nook. Maybe you guys can recall what we just discussed about and identify the color of the chair being used here. So what do you think is the color of the chair? Okay. So the actual color was yellow. I think many of you got it right. It was a yellow color. So like we discussed, yellow is a very, youthful and warm, nurturing color. So for a space like the study where it's important to nurture a child or nurture a child's education, it's nice to use a yellow color, I would say. And this is another image of the kitchen, completely desaturated again. Can you guys identify the color theme here? No answers yet. One appears red. Maybe I should keep this on display. Yeah. Somebody said complementary colors. Of course, it's complementary colors, but what are the colors? The colors are actually black and white. There was no color. And if you guys recall what we just spoke about, in the kitchen, it's important for the user to feel a little more intimate with the space. So we've used the same theme on all the walls, and the counter we've maintained a white color, which indicates a sort of clean and hygienic counter. And the common theme across all walls brings the space to closer together, and the user feels a little more intimate with the space. Yeah. So before we wrap up today's presentation, I'd like to leave you guys with some sort of pointers on, what is the right approach to defining a color scheme for any space. And, like all design associated parameters, colors are very subjective. A particular color that you like, another person might not like, or the particular a favorite color of yours might be a color that somebody hates who lives with you or who works with you. So what would be important for a designer to understand is how it influences the perception of that particular space, like we saw earlier. Is it making the space feel smaller? Is it making it feel larger? Is it improving that particular space in any particular way? Also, it's important to understand who the user is in that particular space. So, for example, is it impacting the user's mind in a positive way? Was your intent to make him feel more relaxed in the particular space, or was it to make him feel nervous? Was it for him to come back home from a long day of work and unwind? What is your idea of how we should feel in that particular space? And it's always important to be aware of what your original intent was when you start designing a project. In a project cycle, it's very easy to get lost. By the end of the project cycle, there are a lot of things happening at the same time, and you might lose sight of what your initial intent was. So it's always important to be be aware of what your initial intent was, and can the color that you're using sort of accentuate that in a better way? Whatever your particular idea was, is that color bringing out the best of your vision of that particular space? And by answering these quickly answering these questions, you can decide for yourself, if that space deserves this particular color, or it deserves a black color, or deserves a red color. And in this way, you can develop an ideology for using the right colors in all the spaces that you're going to design in the future. Yeah. So that would be a wrap. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sabrish. This was a very insightful session indeed. So, quite a few learnings for myself also. And I'm certain that students gathered here had an amazing learning experience from a practicing designer like yourself. Now, I would like to open it up for a Q&A session and request all the participants to drop in your queries in the chat box and Q&A section. I will take it up with the speaker myself. And so, like giving you some time, please write in the questions like whatever you have. Meanwhile, I'll take up other questions which I'm having like this from students like over here, and rest of you students, you can type your questions in the chat box, and I'll be asking all these questions from Sabrish. So Sabrish, our first question comes here, and over here it is: can a single color be perceived differently by different people psychologically, and why? Your mic is mute, Sabrish.
Yeah, sorry. Like I was saying, colors are very subjective. So a particular color, let's for example, my favorite color is black. Somebody else might completely hate the color and they might not like it at all. So when they enter a space with a black and white theme, they might, be averted to it, or they might be, they wouldn't like staying in a space where black is the predominant theme. At the same time, for me, being having black as my favorite, I would love to, always be in that particular space. So the psychology also depends on your liking sometimes, not only on only the colors effect on your persona or your mood at that particular point. So yeah, it can definitely vary from person to person.
So the other question is coming from Kirthana Ramesh. What kind of colors seek first impressions, Sabrish?
That's a good question. So, like I was saying initially, all these commercial establishments use bright colors for a particular reason. So, any color that's, one of the primary colors, for example, red, blue, or green, they are the most impactful, I would say, because they are such bright colors. They immediately draw anybody's attention towards it, and people are, always drawn towards a color like this. So, any of the fast food chains you see, McDonald's, KFC, it's always a red or a yellow theme. It's not only about the impression they create; it's people's mind always being drawn towards a bright color. So even when you're designing a space and you want to create the best first impression, accentuating it with the bright color always helps. Yeah.
Sabrish. Okay. So the other question is, Sabrish, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the other question coming from Srijit, could you tell be one aspect to consider in a retail design?
Yeah. Retail design, of course, is very. I mean, depends on the brand's identity sometimes. For example, so a brand is associated with particular color. So a fast food restaurant like McDonald's has a red and yellow theme, and a store probably, I don't know, Miniso for example has a red theme if I'm not wrong. So sometimes brands would want you to use that as your theme in your design, and it also sometimes depends on what kind of an audience you're catering to. So for example, if it's a very upmarket or premium brand, using bright or golden accents or metallic accents can immediately make it feel a little more premium. So it completely depends on the kind of space that they're trying to create, and also the brand's identity, for example, and maybe even the client, whoever the owner is, what his opinions are. But I would say, like I was saying earlier, primary colors, of course, bright colors always create best impressions on people, and the brand's identity can be something that you can always be aware of and be mindful of while designing the theme for a retail store, for example. Yeah, I think you're on mute, Ishan. Yeah.
sorry. So thank you, Sabrish, for your good color palette of some three colors for the interiors.
Three colors, right? If you look back to my presentation, there was the talk of a triadic or the split complementary color scheme where three colors work well as complementary colors. So for example, if you can quickly if I can quickly scroll back to the color wheel that I was presenting earlier. So here you can see a yellow, blue, and a pink sort of having complementary colors, or an analogous color scheme where yellow, orange, and green. So again, it's a very subjective matter where the designer either you go with your if you're the designer, you go with your preferred colors, or you ask the client. If the client doesn't have an opinion, of course you can use your preferences, but generally you go with the client's preference of what their favorites are. You can't. There's no one scheme fits all sort of approach to this. And I cannot say, for example, which is the best or which is the right color scheme to go if you're choosing three colors.
Okay, acha. So the next question comes from Neha, like how to plan a color scheme for any tiny space.
Yeah. Uh, Again, when I was talking about the perception of volume in a particular interior space, light colors always make the space feel a lot more airy and enlarged than it already is. So white can be your primary theme, and using very light pastel colors, for example, would help in making the space feel very light and airy. You don't want to use anything that's heavy and weighing down the space. It should always feel a little light, and bright colors can also be used, but only as accents, I would say.
Uh, wow, I did not know that. Okay. So the next question is from Jay. What do we need to consider when choosing the light color and intensity when combining it with interior colors?
Yeah, that's a very good question actually. And lighting design is of course a completely different subject. There are lighting designers who are professionals who handle this. So in general, light, for example, are warm lights and completely white lights. You generally lighting when you talk about lighting, there are 3 or 4 temperatures that designers work with. That's 3000, 4000, and 6000 Kelvin, which is completely white, and 3000 is completely yellow light. So it depends on the space. So for example, in living spaces, you always use the completely warm color, like warm light. For example, 3000 Kelvin is the warmest, and in living spaces you use warm lights at 3000 Kelvin, and private spaces and spaces of study, or where you want to look at something in particular, you want to use white. For working spaces, for example, kitchens always have white light. So the color intensity is of course important because the reflection of this light on the colors can bring out the right color or tone of that particular shade.
Okay, Sabrish.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the next question is, what type of color scheme will give the highest contrast? And what is ideal space to use for high contrast color scheme?
Yeah, I mean, it's again a similar question. So the highest contrast would of course be complementary colors, at either end of the color wheel or the color spectrum. So black and white is the highest contrast, I would say. And then using two opposing complementary colors in the color wheel would give you the highest contrast for sure.
Uh, so the next question is, what is the scope for metallic colors?
I think metallic colors are very trending right now in design in general, and using metallic colors automatically gives a little more premium experience to the user or to whoever's using that particular space. They generally use as accents, I would say, and not usually don't use a complete metallic theme. Metal is always complemented with the base sort of theme, and then these are used as accents everywhere.
Okay. And the next question is from Ronak. How to choose color when it comes to natural lighting and artificial lighting in a space?
Yeah. So,
Interesting.
like I just answered, so lighting design is a completely different subject. So natural light, of course, is considered to be completely white almost, and artificial lighting. When you come to artificial lighting, designers use warm lighting at 3000 Kelvin to white light at 6000 Kelvin. So
Because I thought
what's important would be to choose the right light that complements your color. So because you'll be designing that particular space first, and you would design the color theme based on the usability of the space or the functionality of the space, and the lights should then bring out the same functionality or the same intent that you're trying to bring out with your color scheme. And considering both of them, as planning for it initially in your design is always important, and you shouldn't sort of go with opposing colors and opposing lighting schemes.
Thank you, Sabrish. I would like to wrap up the session as we are towards the end of this wonderful session and such a lot of knowledge given by our Sabrish, speaker over here. And I would like to thank him for giving us his precious time and all the participants over here in this webinar to making it such a good learning experience for us. So thank you, everybody, and we will be now wrapping it up. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.